Your game is about to get a wake-up call.
Hello and welcome to the Red Rooster Golf podcast. Alongside company founder Kerry Moher, I am Brad Fritch, former PGA Tour player, current Korn Ferry Tour member, and Red Rooster founding partner. Red Rooster Golf. Join us in waking up your golf glove game, an oft neglected part of your equipment and yet ever present on each and every shot you hit. Learn to manage your glove. Make sure it's there to help you and change it when it's not. Red Rooster Golf. Wake up, shake up, step up, and give. Kerry, it's good to see you again. Since our last show, which was focused on the PGA show, we've had a really good couple of weeks. And now in this episode, we get to catch up with Bob Weeks.
That's right. The Canadian golf legend. And this was neat for me. I've followed Bob's columns and his work on camera with TSN for years. But I didn't really know his story. How did he get into the game? And didn't realize how much he still loves it.
Up next, we chat about the 2023 majors, Bob's first impression of Red Rooster Golf, and one of Bob's most memorable moments on a golf course, where he got to caddy in the same group as a legend. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Red Rooster Golf podcast. Man, how is your life going these days? What are you busy with?
Well, actually, I just want to say this is like the first time that you've ever interviewed me, because you're turning the tables, right? How many times have I interviewed you over my career? I'm busy with lots of stuff. Busy with golf, busy with curling. In fact, I was on the recording an interview this morning with an old friend of yours, Mr. Brad Gouju, who is a world-class curler. In fact, going for his 20th Briar this year. Imagine that. He's going to go and play in his 20th. He's defending champion as well. So there's a crossover there. I know you guys went to junior golf camp or something together at one point. But so this is the time of year, anyway, to get back to your original question, when I have the golf curling overlap. And it's all good, though. All fun. And it's happy to be covering two things that I love.
Yeah, so just a bit of background really quick. So Brad Gouchu's from Newfoundland, very good golfer, and he and I were roomed together at Royal Montreal in the Canadian, or I guess the Quebec junior camp back in, the summer of either 99 or 2000. I can't remember. Had no idea he was a great curler. Maybe he wasn't back then. I have no idea.
Right.
But then, 10 years later or 8 years later, I see Brad Gouchu playing in a Briar and eventually goes to the Olympics. And I'm like, okay, surely this is the same guy. It's amazing. He's had quite the distinguished curling career. But anyways, back to our Red Rooster Golf podcast, not the curling podcast. Bob, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? I think you're from Montreal, but you have some golf roots in PEI. How did you get into golf, and how did you kind of get started?
You're right. I was born in Montreal and lived there till I was 12, but my family's roots go way back, about 1850 to Prince Edward Island. In fact, my great-grandfather was one of the founding members of the first golf course in Prince Edward Island. So I spent basically every summer out there, still have a fair bit of family out there. Moved to Toronto when I was 12, and my dad got transferred, and one of the perks of his transfer was that they gave him a golf membership. So I was not really a golfer before that, although I'd golfed a couple times out in PEI. We got a membership at Weston Golf Club, where I'm still a member today. And that was kind of where I got my, first love of golf. I worked at a summer job at a municipal golf course in Toronto called Scarlet Woods. And that was my first job in golf. And was my first job I had after graduating from university. I went to the University of Windsor. And the first job I had after that was working for the Lottery Corporation. And believe it or not, my job was to give out the big checks. And so,
That's awesome.
But I will say, I always use this line when I give talks. I said, I think I actually won the lottery when I got hired at Score Golf magazine. I just submitted some story ideas to John Gordon, who was the editor at that point. He took a couple of freelance ideas, and then they hired me as sort of a junior editor. And here I am, 35, 6, I don't know what it is, something like that, years later now, and still enjoying it. I moved full-time to TSN about 8 years ago, but I'd always been with TSN and Score kind of at the same time for many years. But Yeah, it's been a long road. I like to say that I started off interviewing George Knudson, and now these days I'm interviewing Brooke Henderson and pretty much everybody else in between along the way.
That's amazing. The just that connection with just this idea of winning the lottery. It's funny how like some little things can turn into big things, and these little breaks. When you started playing at Weston, and that's a special place. We got a chance to play a couple of years ago. Our mutual friend Nick Starchuk got us on, and that's a golf course you could play every day happily. I remember getting pictures with the Arnold Palmer statue up front, so it's got great history. But what do you remember from your first early rounds? Like, did you fall in love with the game? Did you find it challenging? Like, what were the early memories?
The early memories I had was, I guess, playing a lot with my dad, as I think a lot of people grew up with, playing with a parent, hopefully. And that was special time that you got to spend together. The course was hard. I've never been a great golfer. Like I think I was a single digit handicap maybe for like a week one time in my life. I'm a 10 point something right now index. I don't know what that translates to in terms of my actual handicap, but I've always sort of been like a 10 to a 15 handicap. I've never been to the point where I thought I could make a living playing golf. That never ever entered my mind, but I always wanted to try and play decently. And I've won the C Flight and the B Flight club championships there. I won the 4-ball championship. So, you go out and you have some events, but what I really remember most was the friends I made along the way. And some of them are, when I was 12 and 13 years old, I still have probably my two closest friends are guys I met at Weston. I did go to high school with them, but I think that social part of golf was big. I also curled there in the winter, which goes back to the top of our program. And I just sort of always found a way to have fun and enjoy myself on the golf course and never really get too stressed about it. So those are kind of the memories, I guess, growing up.
It is amazing how, like you said, the friends we meet along the way. Carrie and I met in junior golf, and we lost touch for a lot of years, and then 30 years later, here we have a golf company, and we're going hard at it day after day. It's pretty amazing that way. Bob, you mentioned you play at Weston. It's one of the great courses in Canada. You actually wrote a book, didn't you, about great golf courses?
I wrote a book called The World's Greatest Golf Courses. And there's a long story there, which also kind of brings into perspective a few things. I got a call one night from Lauren Rubenstein, who is basically my mentor and the guy that I wish I could, and I think every golf writer wishes they could write like Lauren. He had an offer to write this book, and he couldn't do it, so he passed it on to me, and I wrote this book having I think there was 60 golf courses in the book. I'd probably played 5 of them. And so it was a lot of research and a lot of kind of, in those days was before the internet as well. We sort of had, I sort of faxed a lot of requests to these golf courses, and it came back and was, had beautiful pictures and not that much copy, thank goodness. And you can still find it on, remainder bins for 99 cents these days. It's I guess kind of a coffee table book of more than anything, but it did open the doors for me to write some other books later on. Not surprisingly, no other golf books, but I've written a number of curling books over the years, including Curling for Dummies, the actual Dummies book, which was an experience to know that some people are learning how to play curling from me. But the writing part of is what I always liked. When I was working at the Lottery Corporation, I just loved to write long form magazine style pieces, and that's what I submitted to John Gordon. And they say I'll never be as good a writer as Lauren Rubenstein or even Jason Logan, who's the editor now at Score Golf, but I still love to do it, and I love to tell a story and kind of get deep into it and ask all the interesting questions. That's kind of the fun I have when I'm covering golf, whether it be for TSN or back in the day for Score Golf.
That's wild. So did you didn't get to play all those golf? You mostly researched them.
Yeah, exactly. It was what they call a contract book. So you don't even get royalties. They just pay you a flat fee to do it. And it was probably, I'm surprised they hired me, to be perfectly honest with you, but I'm glad they did.
So fast forward to today. I wanted to see if you remembered where we first met. I was always a very I was okay as a junior. I had some success as an amateur, but I don't think you were around at those events. Was the first time we met in '06 at Wingfoot?
It could have been, you're right. It could have been. Unless there was some chance meeting at a Canadian Tour event somewhere along the way. But I think you're right. I think it was '06 at Wingfoot, because I think I somehow reached out to you. I don't know what we did back in those days. Was there email? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, how would you get, you'd have to call someone actually.
Yeah. And I think we set up an agreement arrangement to, okay, we'll meet you on such and such a day at such and such a place. But I think that's right. The first time I think we did meet.
I'll tell you a funny story, Bob, real quick. I remember I reached out to you to see if I could play a practice round with Mike Weir, because I know that you and Mike knew each other fairly well, and it got set up through Mike's agent, I think. And then I'm not going to say he ghosted me. He didn't know anything about it. So his agent set it up, but Mike didn't know about it. And so I saw him and I'm like, hey, we're supposed to play together. And he didn't know who I was. And he said, well, I just made a time, because you had to sign up in the pro shop.
Right.
There weren't tee times. They weren't, hard and fast, but they wanted you to sign up just to kind of keep the flow going. And he's like, oh man, I just signed up with this guy and this guy. And to this day, my mother is, I'm fairly certain that she might cheer for someone else other than Mike Weir when he's in contention. It's so funny. I'm like, Mom, it's okay. It was a misunderstanding. It was really.
It sounds like a Seinfeld episode about the reservation, like,
oh,
yeah,
totally.
You make the reservation, but you've got to keep the reservation.
That's right, man. She harbors a grudge, at least in this case. So yeah, I think we did meet for the first time at Wingfoot. That makes sense. It was me and Mike and Stephen Ames were the only Canadians in the field that week. And the golf course was torture. I don't know if you remember being there all those years ago. Yeah. And +5 was the winning score. And I want to say +8 was the cut, just something crazy, something completely ridiculous. And that was the first year that they did the graduated rough, where it was almost unplayable about 20 yards off the fairways. And those fairways are tight.
I think that was the year actually we debuted the shoe cam on TSN. We had a little DeGero, or a little tiny camera that we strapped to my foot, and we showed the footage of your foot walking through the rough and how deep it was.
Oh, nice.
People still remind me about that one, but it was pretty weird. And then another year we did something where we took all sorts of different objects from this house we were staying in, like a billiard ball and a beer bottle, and we hid them in the grass just to show people how deep it was. But I think that was the year that we sort of started doing that, referencing the depth of the rough.
Bob, what do you remember? Maybe that was the first time you kind of connected with Brad, and from there, was it a number of years later before Brad finally cracked the PGA Tour and went up through the Canadian Tour, now Corn Ferry, etc. But what do you remember of his game as you kind of like watched him go through? Because probably at that point he was a little bit on your radar and watching his game play through. I recently got to caddy for him. That was my first like true sort of up close, and so there's certain parts of his game that really jumped out at me. But what did you kind of see maybe over the years, like some of the things that Brad did really well? It's so hard to get to the PGA Tour. It's usually you got to avoid the weaknesses, but what were those things that jumped out that Brad did better than most?
I do remember a couple things, and some of them are specific to the physical parts of his. Like I remember him off the tee being very good. Always remembered him being off the tee very good. And I always remember him having sort of silky hands around the greens for a guy who was a bigger guy. And you sort of don't translate that always that often. I always remember those two things standing out. But I also remember him never sort of wavering his perseverance. He was always sort of the same, in the same mindset. You couldn't tell if he was shooting 10 over or 10 under. And I always thought that was kind of cool, because maybe Brad has points where he was slamming clubs or something, but I never saw anything like that. He always seemed to be enjoying himself out on the golf course and kind of walking along. And then there was always sort of a casualness. I can remember at Royal Montreal one time, the Canadian Open there, and Jason and Logan and I showed up or something, and we were just sort of standing by the ropes, and Brad had hit his tee shot and he walked over and he just kind of, hey, how are you guys doing? As if it was sort of like a casual 18 over at the City of Muni. And here he was playing in the national championship. So I always felt he was very good and relaxed in his rounds afterwards, I think there was always a little bit of, when you'd interview him, he always was talking about, things that he could have done better, or opportunities missed or something, but he was never really, to me, angry with himself or something. He just always wanted to get better. You could tell that. How does that sound, Brad?
Well, you probably skipped over the part from 01 to 06 where I was a psychopath on the golf course, but you didn't know me yet. So, no, I was always able to internalize a lot of stuff. I'd say post 2009, which is kind of when I started to play better. Excuse me. A lot of that had to do when my daughter was born, my perspective changed, and, it took it not more serious, but hey, there's a lot more at stake here now than there used to be. I always tell that story. It's like, now I'm playing for diaper money, and
right.
Yeah, my daughter needs diapers. So
right.
That was kind of the change in my kind of perspective on the game. Bob, I wanted to get your thoughts on the 2023 major championships. The list of venues is pretty impressive. They're very diverse, and maybe we can just run through a couple of them real quick. Obviously, the Masters, everyone sees it. Everyone knows the golf course. A lot of people can kind of see every hole in their mind. Sorry. But what do you think this year's Masters is going to entail? Obviously, there's this perpetual PGA Tour versus Live, and who can play better, and Champions Tour or Champions Dinner uncomfortableness, if you will. But what do you think the main storylines are going into the Masters this year?
I think there'll be two. I think the first one will be, as you mentioned, the Live guys being there for the first time as Live guys. And I talked to Ben Crenshaw. I had a chance to spend some time with him just last week, actually, and he was saying he sort of manages the Champions Dinner. Byron Nelson handed his job over there, and Ben does that. He was sort of worried that it might get out of hand, but he said, I hope that everyone just realizes that we're there to sort of honor Scotty and his win. And he said, usually people end up in the same kind of areas of the room anyway. So guys sit beside each other. So I'm not too worried about that, but I think there'll be a little bit of us versus them. I mean, obviously there's lawsuits going against each other and each side. So that might sort of raise some things with certain people. I think enough of the guys there are still friends that it won't be too bad. And I think the other story will be the lengthening of the 13th hole. They've knocked it back 35 yards. It's going to be interesting to see what the guys go in there with. Talking again with Crenshaw, he said the first time he played the Masters, he hit a 4-wood in there for his second shot. Back, 2014 when Bubba won, he hit a wedge. So that hole has certainly been a very, very, very makeable birdie for most of the guys. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if this has any effect on the scoring out there. So that to me is what you're going to see. The other sidebar sort of story for Canadians is if we get one more Canadian in there, we've got 4 in the field right now. If we get one more, it'll be the most ever for Canadians in the Masters 5. We've only ever had 4 before a couple times. So that'll be interesting.
Have you played there, Bob?
I have. I played there in 2014, actually.
So you won the media draw?
Took me 19 years to win it, but I did. There were a lot of years I just brought my clubs down and never took them out of the travel bag, just hoping and praying. And then I finally got drawn. It's an experience. It really is. They treat you very well. I got a caddy. They actually, you walk in, they take you into the clubhouse and they put you up in the champions locker room. They knew I was a Canadian, so I had Mike Weir's locker. And then you go out the course or to the range and you get a caddy. And after I hit my first shot, the caddy said to me, he says, "Mr. Weeks," he says, "are you a gambling man?" I said, "A little bit." He says, "Well, let's have a bet." And I said, "Okay, what's that?" He said, "For every weed you find today, I'll pay you $100. He said, "But if at the end of the day you don't find any weeds, you owe me $1,000. What do you think?" And I just started looking around I'd hit my tee shot on the first hole. I started looking around as we're walking down the hole, and I just said, "Yeah, no bet." There's no bet. It's an amazing place. Even though I had been there and covered it so many times, playing it was a much different perspective. And I know you've played it, Brad, but it's a special place to play golf.
Yeah, I played it probably a month after you did. Then I played it in May of 2014.
Okay.
I have one thing that I was very surprised about when I played it, and I'd never been there before that day. But is there anything that stood out to you while playing it that surprised you or was different than you being there and covering it?
The green on the third hole always stands out to just how shallow it is. Like, I just could not believe that guys can get a ball to stop up there. I had trouble going back and forth a little bit. And without the crowds there, the other thing was how quiet a place it was. The 16th hole, the pond, was just lined with turtles, and they were all just out there sunning themselves. And the greens were as fast as I was expecting. I wasn't expecting the breaks that they gave that's why you have a good caddy. And I remember talking to Brant Snedeker, who came over and asked me if I made the draw yet, because that was big. Everyone knew that I hadn't been picked yet. So he came over and he said, as quick as the greens are going downhill, he says, you got to be confident to hit them firm going up the hill, because they can be slow when you're hitting it up. And that was probably the other thing that stood out for me.
Yeah, the only thing that surprised me, or the one thing that surprised me the most, was the greens are actually a lot smaller than I pictured them being. 9 and 18, you see the crowds framing the green all the time, and I always thought, man, these are pretty big greens. Try hitting a 5-iron into number 18, which is what I had to do. I mean, the thing is narrow. It is very narrow. It's deep from front to back, but it's just not a very big it's not a very big green. And that's kind of that was my big takeaway of the whole thing. And it, like, the second shot on 13, where are you hitting it to? Like, the green is tiny for whatever you're hitting in. 4-wood, I can't imagine. I can imagine hitting a wedge, but I hit, I think, a 6-iron or a 5-iron, and the margin for error is tiny. So whenever guys play there and hit the green into on Sunday at the Masters, I am so uberly impressed. I really am, because it's such a tough shot.
The greatest shot that I saw there came when I was playing, and we were just finishing out on 18. We were all sort of standing around shaking hands, and all of a sudden one of the caddy yelled, "Look out, look out." And somebody in the front left bunker on the 9th green thinned it. It went up and over, landed on the back of our green, and rolled down into the cup. That poor guy had to walk over sheepishly and pull the ball out of the hole. But
Nice.
There you go. But you're right. It's a much tougher golf course than you think.
Bob, how many times have you been to the Masters? How many years have you covered it?
This year will be year 28.
Wow. Do you have a routine that you do, like, sort of religiously every year? Because you just the town, like, I went to the University of Georgia. I've been twice on Wednesday practice rounds, and it's like you said. I mean, I've only walked it. I've never played it. Even in HD, it doesn't do those greens justice. It is a pretty scary, intimidating spot visually. But what's a week look like for you? How early do you get down there? And are you like a creature of habit, or do you mix things up each year?
I try to sort of stay the same. I mean, things have changed so much over the years. The old media center that I used to go to is gone now. And I was basically a print reporter the first part. Now I'm a TV reporter, I guess, or on air. We're broadcasting on air. As Brad knows, he was with us for a year. And basically my routine is we get in there Sunday, and I've done most of my homework before that. I usually arrive with a file on my computer of all sort of the top players, different notes that you need to know about them, different quotes that I can use. Hopefully by that time, we've got most of the pieces that we're going to run during the broadcast already cut and ready to go. So you do those. We do a lot of interviews at the Players Championship that'll lead us up to that. But when you get on the ground, I always like to take the first day and walk 18 holes. And usually I do it backwards. I walk, because that way you don't see the same groups the whole way. You start at 18 green and walk back to 1 just to see if there's anything different, anything new. And then from there, it's just really cover the ball. It's a busy week. It's a long week. It's a different week because you're all living in a house together. People don't know that the hotel rentals there are very minimal. They're very small. They don't have a lot of hotels so people rent out their homes. And we've been in this one home now for about, I think it's maybe 5 or 6 years, maybe a little more. I can't remember if you were at that house that we were at now, Brad, but there's basically 10 of us in this house. And we don't go out for dinner because it's just too hard to get a reservation, A, for 10 people, and B, you're always waiting in line. It's so crowded. This is a small town. Augusta is a town of about 200,000. And, the world descends on it. The restaurants will do between 25 and 30% of their entire year's budget in that 1 week. So it's a pretty remarkable place how they put it all together. But and I like to I like to get up very early. I'm always the first one up in the house. I like to read through all the interview transcripts the day before, make notes, get yourself prepared. And then you come down and you go over the day's work and you start getting prepared. And we're usually at the golf course at about between, I guess, around 8 o'clock-ish on average. And you're leaving around 6, 7, something like that. So they're long days. And the only other routine I have is that I eat egg salad sandwiches all the time. Graham Billette and I have a contest, and we try to see who can eat the most. He's bettered me the last 2 years, though, with 13 during the week. So I'm not sure what his cholesterol was like after, but that's about it.
Well, you're kind of a little guy, Bob, so I don't expect you to eat as much as Graham does. I'll give you a pass on that one. Yeah, I was amazed just in terms of the technical broadcast type stuff when I helped you guys out in 2017 on TSN for the Masters, how well prepared you are, how well prepared James Duthie is. I mean, every time the camera says, all right, we're live, I'm in fear, panicking, because it was my first time basically in front of a national audience, trying to just kind of encapsulate my thoughts on the go. And you guys are so prepared. You have everything not rehearsed, but it's in the back of your mind, and it comes out so easily, so smoothly. I really got a cool window into what it's like to be on site for a major in terms of being a broadcaster. It was really amazing. And the secondary part of that is we got to set up on the par 3 course and see a couple holes in one, even though that was the year that wicked thunderstorm blew through, tornadoes blew through.
Right.
And we had to evacuate. I don't know if you remember that, but my God, I was kind of afraid. We were on a metal stage in the middle of tornado on the way. So that was a little bit different. But yeah, the Masters is a special place. Let's move on to the PGA Championship. It's at Oak Hill, which I've never played. It's in Rochester, New York. Curious if you have any thoughts on that or have any experience there.
I have. I've done a couple of PGAs there. I did Sean McKeel winning that year. That was in 2003. That was the year that Mike had won the Masters and it played well there. And then the last one to win there, I can't remember who it was. Was it Rory? Probably one of. Anyway, there was another PGA Championship there. It's a really good, solid test of golf, and I know it's a members course, so I always say I wonder why they don't go there more often. And they've got courses locked up for 30 years in some cases, like the U.S. Open. But it's close. It's a drive for me. That's okay. It's only about an hour and 20 minutes drive from Toronto, so that'll be good. But it's it's an old school kind of tree lined golf course. I actually think, now that I think about it, I actually went and covered the U.S. Open there too, and Curtis Strange won. I think that was 88 or 89. That was my second U.S. Open. Wow. So I went to that one as well. But it's always been a really good test of golf. I think, time is catching up with it a little bit. They've added some new tees. It's not quite as long as it played those first couple times that I saw it, but I think it'll provide a really distinct kind of, what's the word? I mean, like a private club course. It'll be a little different than some of the ones we've had in the past.
Yeah, that's an old school track with great history. And I think it's been hard to bring these events back to those venues for sometimes logistical reasons. And in some cases, the courses have been getting outpaced. It was amazing to me. I walked the Canadian Open this year, and it looked terrifying to me. I mean, if you had your foot cam would have disappeared in that rough, and yet, I think Justin Rose shot a 60 and McIlroy had a 61, and so it'll be interesting to see if Oak Hill can kind of defend, because is it going to be able to hold up when these guys they can hit the ball so far and so high and stop it on a dime.
It's so many times now too. The courses are, it's not so much about the golf course. It's about everything that you want to build up, the traveling circus, the tents, the corporate stuff that you go on. And even at St. George's last year, I had some people from Golf Canada saying, I think we may have just outgrown this place. I just don't know if we can continue to come here, because it's we just don't have room to sell. And that's basically Golf Canada makes a lot of money on that. And the same thing with the U.S. Open. They want to find a lot of courses that have 36 holes where they can use one course for structures and one course for playing.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's, the since I've played on the PGA Tour, the infrastructure has only grown, and I've been fortunate enough to be at a couple of majors, like the one at Chambers Bay in 2015. You could probably fit 2 golf courses on that property, which served it well as a host course because the U.S. Open is so massive, and they were able to, easily build all that they needed to on that golf course. Speaking of the U.S. Open, new venue this year, LA Country Club, newly redesigned just down the road from Riviera in the Genesis Invitational. What do you foresee happening there? Have you played LA Country Club either before or after the redesign? What do you think's going to be the main storyline there?
Yeah, I have not set foot on that golf course. It's going to be the site of the Olympics as well, upcoming. And I gather there's been quite a bit of work done. I talked to a pal of mine, Jeff Shackelford, who people may know that name, and he's just raving about it. He says that what they've done there is really brought the course, sort of combined its old world strengths with a new world playability. I always remember that line that he told me at last year's U.S. Open. So I think it's going to be a good test. I saw Tiger was over there scoping it out while he was at Genesis and getting his eye on that. So that's a good sign, meaning he'll probably show up there. But there's a lot of good golf courses that haven't hosted U.S. Opens in a long time, and I think this is a kind of a championship style golf course that's going to probably provide that look we were talking about with Oak Hill. Kind of a country club private old school course that's undergone some renovations.
Yeah, there'll be in any particular storylines, anything does that golf course favor anyone? I've read a lot of Shackelford's pieces. It sounds like everybody's super excited.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of positive vibes about going there. For one thing, going to the LA area is always good to go. If you can, it's great. We're going back to the business side, but it's great for sponsorships and things like that. So I think that's big for the USGA. And I think that I don't really know who it's going to favor in terms of a golf course, but probably the usual suspects when you get into US Open. It's the guys who can stay out of the rough and the guys who can handle mentally the challenges that come with it, with some of the craziness of the speeds of the greens and I think what most days we might call unfair conditions, or certainly bordering on unfair conditions. And that's usually survival of the fittest and the guy who can hold on the longest to that kind of stuff. I've seen some just crazy stuff over the years at the US Open going well back, and some of the ways these guys, I don't know how they survive. Even we were just talking about it at Wingfoot that you played, Brad. I don't know how you manage your emotions through a week like that, but the guys always say, well, everybody's doing it, everybody's going through it, but I'm not really sure if they are, to be honest with you, at the same level anyway.
Yeah, at some point it becomes a war of attrition. You're just mentally beat down if you're not playing well, if you're not keeping it in the fairway. Bob, in terms of the U.S. Open, what are your thoughts of the traditional courses like a Shinnecock, a Pinehurst, even an LA Country Club versus some of the venues they've gone to recently, such as a Chambers Bay or an Erin Hills, which are very, very different? Do you prefer one or the other? And do you think that the U.S. Open needs to kind of adhere to some strict model like we've seen in the past of the old school, rough lines, the fairways, deep rough, difficult greens? Is there something that you see that you'd prefer?
I mean, I prefer the old school courses. I think the history behind in a lot of those places is always intriguing to me about, this course has hosted this many opens and this fellow won 1 year and here's what the score was. And so you can kind of have a comparison. And I also like when they go to, public courses. Bethpage Black is a great example of that. We've had some good experiences there, but I think you have to, going back to that business side, I think you have to try and test the waters at different places because you're going to run out of courses, as we were just talking about. Now, Erin Hills is an exception. I don't think they'll ever go back there. It's kind of a big ballpark golf course sitting out in the middle of nowhere. And if you go and look at that and look around, and how you get in and out is a big issue there for one thing. Chambers Bay, I just talked to somebody a couple of days ago, a friend of mine who works for Golf Magazine, who was out there, and he says, they've basically redone all the grass there so they wouldn't have that problem again that they had when they hosted it. And the main reason they were going there, the USGA, was because that was a great marketplace that didn't really have a golf course available, that Pacific Northwest area. They had Sahali, but they've outgrown Sahali. So now you're trying to find a place to go in that marketplace. It's untapped. There's all sorts of sponsorship opportunities. That's how these guys kind of look at it to a certain extent. If they can find a course that's playable, you don't want to keep going to the New York area time after time after time. So I don't know. Maybe now the U.S. Open is locked up for the next 100 years, it seems like. So I'm not sure if they'll ever go back to Chambers Bay, but it would be nice to see that. But I do. The answer to your question is I like the old school golf courses if they can host it.
Well, it doesn't get more old school than Royal Liverpool. So for the British Open, how long have you been doing that? Do you go over? What's your kind of routine for?
Yeah, that one's always a little bit, it's a little tougher for us to cover. We just have a cameraman and myself. There's no producer. Obviously the expenses of going over there are a lot more. And if, in past years, if there were no Canadians in it, it wasn't a huge story for us other than when Tiger won, which he did on a lot of occasions at Royal Liverpool. I think in 2006, I haven't been now since before COVID. So the last year I went was 2019. I didn't go last year to St. Andrews. I was a little disappointed that we decided not to go on that. I'm not sure if we're going this year. But Royal Liverpool is a good golf course. Rory won there in 2014 and obviously Tiger in 2006, I'm pretty sure it was. So it's a good golf course. And it's always a fun week because it's a little different week. It's a little bit, the time change makes it awkward because you sort of get there and you can't really talk to anybody back at the office till after lunch because they're not in there yet. So from that standpoint, it's different, but it's a fun week. It's a very different week compared to any other on the PGA Tour in North America. And once a year, I just kind of love going over there and soaking it all up. And I've filed reports standing in short sleeves with a heat wave and a sign that says, "Don't drop your cigarette here because the course is so dry it'll burn up." And I've covered it wearing every layer I have in a toque, so you get every kind of weather over there, which is also it's part of the experience, I think, when you're over there.
There's an American viewer or listener somewhere saying, "What's a toque?" What is that?
That's right.
So as there are more and more Canadians on the PGA Tour, there's 5 now ranked in the top 100 in the world. Does your job get busier? Are you asked to do more? Do you think that Bell Media, TSN sees it as more of a priority if more guys or more Canadians are playing well?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's a big story. I think it's something we cover. We are a partner, TSN and Bell Media, with PGA Tour. So that always goes to the point that we want to kind of work to each other's strengths. It never hurts when you have a guy like Nick Taylor was, up near the top at the Waste Management. And but we're covering. People want to hear Canadian stories. They can go to a lot of different places and get a story on Rory or a story on Tiger or Justin Thomas or whatever. But if they want to know about Canadian players, there's really, they want to hear it probably. They're only going to hear it probably from us. So from the Canadian media. So that's good. I love it. Is it more work? Sure it is, but it's great work. I mean, chasing down a one-on-one interview with Brooke Henderson after she wins, or Nick Taylor after he almost won last week. There's a sort of a behind the scenes process that we work at with the PGA Tour. If someone gets in contention, okay, we're going to set up this one-on-one. This is when it's going to happen. This is how it's going to work. So you're scrambling a little bit, but it's always great. It's a good feeling. And, you like to be a guy who gets to ask the questions to for these great moments for these guys and girls. And it's a special responsibility, I guess, in some ways. But I've covered golf in Canada when there were very few people on the PGA Tour. Like Dave Barr was the only guy one year. I can remember that. Now to have 5, 6, 7, 8 out there every week, there seems to be one at the top of the leaderboard. I much prefer the hard work and the more opportunities to do that.
Why do you think there are more Canadians out there now?
I think there's a combination of things. This year is the 20th anniversary of Mike Weir winning the Masters. And if you talk to that class of players that's out there now, they can all tell you how much of an influence that was on them. And I think Golf Canada's national team program, which, by the way, the United States Golf Association is now trying to copy and working with Golf Canada to find out how they do it. I think that's a big part of it. I think it's, to a certain extent, it's a little bit of luck, and the right number of guys came around at the right time. But I think the pool is a little deeper now as well. There's more guys taking competitive golf seriously. If you talk to Mackenzie Hughes or Corey or Taylor, going through the Kent State program, that upped their game a little bit to make it worthy of the PGA Tour per se. And I think you'd be wrong in saying that there are some guys that just have a lot of pure talent. I mean, Adam Svensson is a guy who I played with years ago in a Pro-Am, and I thought, my God, this guy, I don't know how he can't be on the PGA Tour next year. He was just birdieing everything, and he was just so aggressive with everything. Took him a while to kind of figure out how to do it, but there's those stories too. So I'm not sure if there's one particular reason, but it's a fun time. I just wish there were more women golfers that could keep up with Brooke, and we'd have a complete set.
Yeah, it's neat. Being in Ottawa, watching Brooke come up through the ranks. I remember going to a pro event. She must have been 14 or 15, and she was shooting these crazy scores, and I'd never seen her play. I just saw her on the range, and it's like a different sound when the ball's coming off of her club, and she was with, 25 and 26-year-olds. And it was, so it was sort of no surprise to see, how well she's done, but you're right. There's not where you see, 5 or 6 Canadians on the PGA Tour, like week in, week out. You never know who's going to be there. You had, a number of Canadians who could have been on the President's Cup team. And in some ways it's maybe like lit a fire under, Svensson and Taylor and Hadwin. They've come out this year, Hughes playing, some of their best golf. Is there anyone on your radar other than, was it Lucy Liu, who the 12-year-old who qualified for the Canadian Open? I watched her for a few holes. That was also like eye-opening to see a 12-year-old who had sort of a pro's game, like she could hit it like a pro. I think like she's so young, it almost looked easy for her. Like I wonder if at some point it may get a little, golf may become a bit more cluttered and complicated. But anyone else on your radar on the LPGA? Brooke, everybody follows her every week. She's world class. Anyone else that you see coming up?
There's a few out there. I'm always a little weary of sort of saying this is the next great person, because I've seen over my career, the next great George Knudsen's and the next great Mike Weirs and the next great, it's just kind of gone on. And some of them do develop, certainly. And then some of them, come out of nowhere in some certain cases. On the women's side, there's a few, they're working hard. There's Monet Chun, who's a very good player out of Michigan. And there's Bridget Thibault, who's just turned professional after finishing up at San Diego State. I got to play with her last year on the Team Canada Day. They have a day where they play with the media, and I was very impressed. It was actually at my home course. So I think she made 6 or 7 birdies, having never seen the course before. So that was pretty impressive. So there's always a number that are on the verge. And I think the big thing now is that they're getting a little bit of support that, as Brad, I'm sure, can attest, that transition from amateur golf to professional golf can be daunting, physically, mentally, and perhaps most importantly, monetarily. And I think you need a little bit of money so you're not out there thinking, gosh, I got to make this putt, or I'm going to be, riding my bike back home or something like that. So I think those changes that Golf Canada has made with their team program to give these people, both male and female, every opportunity to succeed is really huge. And they're getting some good funding now from some wealthy backers, which I think will help as well. But if you look at the Mike Weir timeline, it's 20 years. Brooke Henderson has been on the tour now, I think 7 or 8 years now. But so it may be a little while before we see the next wave of Brooke Hendersons. And I mean, Brooke's only 25. My goodness, she's something else. And as you said, she has that special sound that comes off her club. There's only 2 players that I've ever sort of followed that have that. And the other one was Graham Dillette, who, when he hit an iron shot, man, it made just a noise that was so different than anything I've heard before. But it's fun to watch Brooke. And I always say when she's in Ottawa, that be a good, when she's playing like last year at the Hunt Club, I always say it would be a good day to rob a house in Smiths Falls, because I don't think anybody was there that day.
Yeah, no doubt. A progression of professional golf players is such a diverse thing. There's no timeline that you can put on it. You see guys and girls jump to the PGA and LPGA tours, and you see others, that take 10 years. You mentioned Svensson. I always thought he was uber talented. He was probably tired of people telling him how good he was, because he's been good for so long, but just hadn't quite made that jump. Now he's won. And and now he's just he's going to be on the PGA Tour for a long time. He's that good. It's just I like what Golf Canada is doing. They're not saying, hey, it's this year or nothing for you. It's, we're going to invest in these players for a bunch of years, so that if you lose your card, or if you go down to the mini tours, or if you get your card and lose it, it's not the end of the world. That happened way too often when I was younger. Not that I was a part of that program, but I know it happened to a bunch of guys. And I was always saying, listen, if so-and-so gets his Korn Ferry Tour card, then has to go back to the Canadian Tour, that's okay, because you've identified his talent. Like, don't change your mind. Don't draft someone in the NHL and then after a bad year, cut him loose. NHL teams would never do that. They invest a lot in their prospects, and they see it through a lot of the time. They give them more than one chance. So that's a good plan by Golf Canada. I don't know why the USGA just wouldn't go to Sweden and Australia, because that's who Golf Canada, kind of modeled their stuff after, right? That's funny. Maybe it just don't want to make the trek overseas. But that's interesting. I did not know that about the USGA. That's very cool. I don't think they have anything to worry about in developing amazing golfers.
They just got so deep in numbers, right? So
yeah,
so many great players.
So Bob, now that we've talked about the majors, let's talk about Red Rooster. I wanted to get your initial perspective on when, I'm not sure if I informed you personally. We have a fun group chat, me, you, and Jason Logan from Score Golf. But when you heard that I was, part of a golf glove company that we were going to launch, what was your initial thought? Because you've been to the PGA show and seen every dumb idea that's ever crossed the table.
Yes,
what was your initial perspective?
I thought that the idea of a subscription service for gloves was brilliant. I really thought that was something that was very underrated, because there's so many times when you go out and you play around a golf and you show up on the first tee and you're 2 minutes from your tee time, you reach into your bag and you realize your glove's got a big hole in the palm or something like that. So I thought that was always good, because you'd always have something ready for you. And then I think when you guys were doing your initial offering, you were trying to sell, I can't remember how many gloves in that first little bit, was it the GoFundMe campaign or startup of something?
Yeah.
Okay, whatever it was. And you got to 98. And then I checked again about 15 minutes later, it was still at 98. And I said, I've got to give these guys, got to buy one. So, I mean, far be it from me, the guy who gets all sorts of free stuff to go, but I did. I plunked my money down, and I think I was trying to become number 100, but I think someone passed me. I think I was like 104 or something. And the glove came very promptly, I will say that. And the one thing that, first of all, the glove fit great, because for left-handers, for some reason, I don't know, I always have trouble getting a left-handed glove fitting properly. And I remember, Brad, you saying how you were sort of overwhelmed by how many left-handed offers there were, requests there were at first. The glove was great. It fit perfectly. It was not I hate gloves that are like a mitt, that are too thick. It wasn't. The one thing that stood out to me was how long it lasted. And I used that for 10, 12 rounds. And usually I'm like a 7-round guy for a glove. Maybe I might even do it for 20 rounds, but it was a very solid glove. And the process that you guys came up with, the thinking was awesome.
That's good to hear. We're going to put you on our next ad, by the way. All those things that we love to hear about durability, fit perfectly. I love that. Yeah. But we were going to note, if you didn't, that you were a initial Kickstarter backer. And to be fair to all of my friends in the media in Canada, there were a lot of you guys, I'll call you, that supported us and actually still do. So we appreciated that, and we got a lot of good publicity from you guys before the launch. That was very cool.
Yeah, it was huge.
I've seen lots of responses since, though, and lots of good feedback from people who are probably don't know you as well as I know you guys, that I think is, not to say that our feedback wasn't and support wasn't legit, but I think you guys have come up with a great product, obviously, because you're getting great reviews.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate it. Bob, we're going to end here with something that we're going to debut on our podcast. And so this might be a little rough. It's not going to be, super formal yet, but we're going to give you kind of 3 opportunities to answer a question. And just, if you need a second to think about it, that's fine. But the first one is, share something that's the most memorable thing that's either happened to you on a golf course or that you saw on a golf course? It could be in your time as covering something, covering a tournament. It could be something where you just played with someone and it was an amazing day, but kind of your memory on a golf course that sticks in your mind and you'll never forget.
Boy, there's a bunch I could throw at you. I think one that jumped right out at me was that the day I got hired at Score Golf, which was 1987, they asked me if I could come and caddy in the Canadian Open Pro-Am, because the executives from Score Golf and two of their clients were going to go out there and then play. I think it was a guy, I remember it was the president of Canon Canada, the photography company. So I went out there, showed up, and I had the publisher, this guy named Randy McDonald. I had his golf bag to carry. And lo and behold, on the first tee, our pro was Jack Nicklaus. And so I got to walk around. This is the first day on the job, literally, at Score Golf. I got to walk around 18 holes with Jack Nicklaus. And I felt sorry for Randy, because a lot of times he'd have to sort of say, hey, I'm over here, bring me my club. And I'd be over like talking to Jack and picking his brain and getting my picture taken. So that one certainly stands out. And then in a bigger, I don't know if you can call this a moment, but during COVID, I set up golf is, of course, as we all know, one of the things we could do. And I set up a little 9-hole game every Monday afternoon. My dad, who is now 90 and still playing golf, so he was 88 at that point. And we played 9 holes every Monday afternoon, and then had a drink and a little bite afterwards after our 9-hole round. And we did that every Monday throughout COVID. And I can tell you, it's just like, that was just the greatest moment. And I think everybody enjoys playing with their family and with their fathers or their mothers or whatever it is. And that moment really sticks. That year really sticks out for me.
That's awesome. All right, Carrie, cool. Number two.
Number two, is there a particular feeling in golf that keeps you coming back? And this can be like, it's playing at sunset or sunrise, or it's, striping a 2-iron or holing a long putt. Is there something that keeps bringing you back?
I guess the challenge of playing my own course and always trying to get a little bit better on that course is one thing. My lowest round at my home course is 76, and I've come, many times close to beating that. I was actually 2 over on the 17th hole and hooked 2 balls out of bounds.
Oh no!
So that wasn't it. But I love the feeling of when it just seems like it's automatic and you hit the ball on the face. And I'm a guy who loves to go out to the range. I'm a guy who takes lessons every year. I work with the same guy pro by the name of Mark Linton, who was a Kent State grad as well. And I just love to kind of always try and find that little secret that'll make things better. And, editing instruction pieces for decades, you kind of get a little mixed up in your head with so many different theories and thoughts. But I just love that feeling of just maybe trying to be a little bit better than you were the last time. And it doesn't matter if I'm not, but just the chase of that is good.
That's awesome. And I'm sorry we laughed at you hitting 2 balls out of bounds on 17.
That's okay.
I apologize for that. So Bob, you're probably aware of our Play It Forward program. For every glove that we sell, we donate a youth glove to organizations that promote youth getting into golf. Is there a person or an organization that you've come across in your travels that kind of you'd like to recognize that plays it forward, that gives back to the game of golf?
There's 5 municipal golf courses in Toronto, and they're under threat. A lot of people want to use the land for different things or turn them into parks or urban farms. And I'm always kind of trying to push that. And they have some great junior programs in there. And I've always tried to support those junior programs silently a little bit and give, because most of the kids who play at those courses are not obviously going to play at private clubs or don't have the wherewithal. So always try to do things, whether it be arranging for some clubs to be donated from someone or some financial stuff to try and put some of the clinics and stuff together. So I've kind of done that a little bit silently, but municipal golf is where I got my first job. I didn't have to play there. I played at a private club. I was lucky, but I see a lot of kids who come up through there and really, really enjoy the game of golf through those courses. And the first experiences that you get for many, many people, whether they be juniors or adults, is on the city courses that are prevalent in a lot of cities across Canada and the United States. So those are important to me.
That's great. I've read a little bit about that. Rick Young's very adamant about that cause and keeping development off those courses. So that's great. Bob, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today on the Red Rooster Golf podcast. I look forward to hopefully working with you in the future. I don't see it because Graham Dillette, I substituted for someone, I guess you could say, on TSN one year. But I love watching you and James and Graham and sometimes David Hearn on those broadcasts from the majors. It's always a pleasure to get Canadian content and to get Canadian perspective at those places. And I promise this year I might not bug you guys for why you're not showing the Canadian golfers at the Masters.
Or any broadcast for that matter.
Or any broadcast. That's right. I won't pile on. I promise.
Well, it's been great having you as a friend and following your career. And I gotta, it's a small, when you get to that kind of level, there's a small group of people out there, but they're so tightly knit. You can call up Corey Connors or whatever. That group of people who have made it in golf as players is pretty special. And you have a good relationship with all these people, and they all respect each other. And it's fun to kind of watch that and see it grow, and hopefully sort of a little bit be a part of it as well. But you guys have got a great thing going. Congratulations. And I wish you all the best. That was really cool, especially the job after he hands out lottery tickets or lottery checks. He gets to caddy in the same group as Jack Nicklaus, which is basically hitting the lottery on his first day on the job. How good is that?
Yeah, I mean, for that to be your first day, like you're sold, right? I guess in some ways it's probably a bit downhill from there.
I bet you a lot of folks would like to have his job, just be on TV a lot and cover golf, and if it's your bag, curling as well. So cool. Bob's such a nice guy. Didn't get to tell us any jokes. He's a super funny guy. He really is. But I'm so glad he could join us. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the Red Rooster Golf Podcast. For my partner, Carrie Moher, I am Brad Fritch. We'll see you again soon. Until then, tee it high, let it fly, and cock-a-doodle-doo.